This is the Pip replacement episode. Except not really, because I think referring to Butters as simply the Pip replacement is way too reductive for the kind of character that Butters is. Butters is perhaps among one of the most complicated characters in the show, next to characters like Eric Cartman and Randy Marsh, both characters I've talked about in the past, but Butters himself is a very special little character because all of his setup is actually done in show and done in a very short time period and then capitalized on in the most effective way possible. I believe I've already mentioned this in another diegesis, but Butters' model was used as the background character for the entirety of seasons 1 and 2, and up until a certain point in season 3. Butters' major first speaking role and his first major role in the show is in the episode Two Guys Naked in a Hot Tub. Two Guys Naked in a Hot Tub does a fantastic job of setting up the groundwork of Butters' character, and South Park continues building on the groundwork that Two Guys Naked in a Hot Tub sets up until Butters' next most important episode in the entire show, Butters' very own episode. Butters' very own episode is perhaps the best unofficial sequel episode in the entire show because it does a good job of capitalizing on the groundwork that was set up previous seasons. So, the transition from season 5 to season 6 is perhaps one of the most unusual transitions in the entire show due to the death of Kenny McCormick. So I'm of the opinion that they were always going to bring Kenny back, and I know this sounds like a conspiracy theory, but the thing is, they wanted you to pay attention to Butters. They basically want you to think of Butters as a main character in their mind. So what do but kill the incredibly disposable main character? And I say that in quotation marks because I do not think Kenny is actually disposable. So they killed the quote-unquote disposable main character and replace him with a character that they had been slowly building up over a few years and tinker with him until he is completely unavoidable in the minds of the audience. So the opening of season 6 is basically Matt and Trey telling you exactly what they intend to do with Butters as a character. They are looking you dead in the eye and telling you, the viewer, that they intend to naturally integrate him into the world as much as they possibly can without feeling that Butters is supposed to be a kind of replacement. And it's all done pretty ingeniously with the first scene that Butters is in. Like, they force him into a Kenny outfit so that he fills the hole in their friend group that Kenny left. He complains about the fact that he isn't Kenny, and the boys, their smile drops when Butters drops the charade. South Park is looking you dead in the eye, and they are saying, we are going to integrate this character into our show as naturally as we possibly can without feeling that he's supposed to be a replacement. And if you think about that, there's some very interesting things being said about how people process grief. Like, this is a funny little comedy scene, but if you take an outsider's perspective, the boys are firing Butters because Kenny is irreplaceable. The show looks you dead in the eye and says, you are not going to replace our friend and you can never replace our friend. You need to find your own niche and you need to leave. And there's just something so incredibly sad about that. I mean, it's beautiful because you know Kenny is going to come back, but if this was a normal TV show, like, this would undoubtedly be an extremely messed up thing to say to one of your peers. Like, the death of Kenny is traumatizing for all parties involved, but it's also like a secret character arc for Stan, Kyle, and Cartman. The death of Kenny McCormick forces Stan, Kyle, and Cartman to lose their childhood in a very unexpected manner, as per typical of anyone who loses a loved one through death. But the boys are never truly the same afterwards, and you can tell by the way they behave that something has intrinsically changed in them. To briefly touch on Professor Chaos is born because of the trauma of losing Kenny indirectly and the boys directly, throwing Butters out of the friend group because he can't replace Kenny. They asked for something unrealistic and they weren't given the thing that they were asking for. Who would have thunk? We'll be talking about Steven and Linda soon, and that's going to come up because this is actually going to be a very special episode of the South Park character Diegesis. But Dougie is also a thing. He's Butters' actual best friend, and he's supportive of Butters. He's actually very kind to Butters. Thumbs up for Dougie O'Connell. And we're going to talk about Casa Bonita, and then we're going to do a special detour. Casa Bonita is the third most important Butters character episode in the entire show, but actually, no, that is not true. It is the most important Butters' character episode in the entire show. Yes, I believe it to be more important than Two Guys Naked in a Hot Tub and Butters' very own episode. And why do I say that? Because Casa Bonita is the episode of the show after Kenny comes back that looks at you directly in the eye and says, haha, I have tricked you. While Butters is not going to be a replacement for Kenny McCormick, we completely intend on making him a main character in his own right, and he has strengths that are not Kenny McCormick's strength. You are going to like Butters for who Butters is. We have tricked you. Ha 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 ha. Okay, and so like Butters and Cartman interacted before, right? But this is also the most important Butters' episode in the entire show because it sets up the friendship of Eric Cartman and Butters Dodge. Two characters who are in a very similar position with very similar backgrounds, who understand each other on a level so deep that none of us will ever be able to truly comprehend. But here is the censure. I understand this friendship because I was also in hell. That's right. We were all in hell together and we were all mutually suffering together, and I was holding their hands while we were in hell and we saw each other and we understood. Basically, I'm saying I know what these two are going through. I am deeply, deeply familiar with this friendship and what this friendship means and what it represents and what they are going through. Like, I don't really know if I can properly, like, convey the feeling of being in hell. But basically, it's like being in a pressure cook oven. Is the simplest way I can explain it, I suppose. When you're in a pressure cook oven, you're really, really hot and uncomfortable all the time. You're literally being cooked alive. But the people around you still expect you to function as normal, and they may or may not know that you are in the pressure cook oven. The people who put you in the pressure cook oven, who are consciously aware that they are putting you in a pressure cook oven, are terrible, and they're bad, and they suck, and you don't like them. But it's different when you're dealing with people who don't know that they're putting you in a pressure cook oven, which is Butters' situation. Leanne is a very, how should I say this? I think I'm just going to have to say it. We don't really know where Leanne is on the pressure cook oven putter in her meter. She behaves like that because she's heavily traumatized and she has very good reasons for creating a bubble and drawing Cartman into it and squeezing the life out of him. We are very aware of the kind of person that Leanne is, but the show is never really direct with how intentional her behavior is, which is probably the most interesting part of Leanne and why people probably don't call her out for her terrible parenting and her bigotries as much as they should, because you don't really want to yell at someone who's a victim. But Leanne is a victim who's making a victim out of the people in her life, i.e. Cartman. She's making a victim out of him because she doesn't want to come to terms with anything that's happened to her. And because Butters and Cartman are in this very similar situation, the two of them mesh together in a way that no other South Park character really does. It's a handshake in hell. They are both mutually in the pressure cook oven together, and they know this, and they are looking at each other dead in the eyes at all times and saying, we're in a pressure cook oven together. Oh my goodness. But the episode also asserts that Butters is not interested in being a passive player in his relationship with Cartman, and that he does expect Cartman to be just as um, acknowledging and conscientious of the pressure cook oven situation as much as he is. Butters doesn't want Cartman to become a baked potato. They still want to come out. He wants to drag Cartman out of the pressure cook oven with him if possible. But he is also not interested in Cartman turning him into a total doormat. And I think South Park strikes the right balance of this. It just personally sucks for me to see them in the pressure cook oven because I know what that's like. It's very intimate to me, their situation, and it can be really sucky because I empathize with both of them very, very much as someone in the pressure cook oven, you know. It's kind of hard to see the place that you were, to see the remnants of places that you can no longer return and behold them through characters who are making the exact same mistakes you would have made in that situation. Okay, now it's time to talk about the Paris Hilton episode. We are going to detour into the diegesis of the Paris Hilton episode because this is relevant to Butters. And also, I originally wasn't going to talk about it because it didn't win the poll. The one that won the poll that time was Kyle and Adultification. And I really like that diegesis, but the one that I actually wanted to do at the time was the Paris Hilton episode. But I'm glad I waited because now I can tie it into Butters. Because the most important South Park child in that episode is actually Butters, despite the fact that they want you to believe it's Wendy. It's not actually about Wendy. It's about the culture surrounding Wendy, but it's actually about Butters. And we'll get into this. But before we get into it proper, here's the thing. This episode, the Paris Hilton episode, was made as a response to one of Paris Hilton's sex tapes leaking. And here's the thing about Paris Hilton, right? She had a really traumatic past. She was brought up in a very conservative, super religious school background. Like, it sounds like a lot of her life was on rails and not within her control, which is undoubtedly incredibly tragic. But expecting Matt and Trey to have known about the dark past of Paris Hilton at a time where this information was not readily available and she was not willing to talk about it is entirely unreasonable. I believe if she had said something about this beforehand, the episode would have come out differently and a different conclusion would have been drawn. But because Matt and Trey were not in a position to present nuanced commentary based on Paris Hilton's past, this is the episode that we got. And while I don't think it's a bad episode of the show, it unfortunately has some rather unfortunate ideological implications that make it a bit more of a you need to use your brain while you're watching this episode more than a South Park episode typically asks you to use your brain because there is missing context. Like, it's so bad because the episode almost veers into sex bad territory, which is so ironic. If you know anything about Trey Parker and you are aware of his life decisions, it's ironic. And the thing is, they've had an episode about plastic surgery before, Bebe's Boobs Destroy Society. And even that episode was very anti-modify your body as a woman in order to attract a man episode. And it's so deliciously ironic the way Trey Parker's life turned out, that these episodes got made and he got he got hit with the life that he had. Wow, it's so deliciously ironic. Okay, it's just so funny. It's so funny. Basically, Paris Hilton's sex tape leaking is stated by South Park to not be a good thing. And South Park is saying that Paris Hilton's sex tape leak is not a good thing because a lot of girls will look at the sex and be all like, oh my gosh, sex must be good. And this little girls and little girls, and they look at it and go, sex good. You know, it's funny that South Park is making this commentary, especially considering that Kenny McCormick, a character that I will probably get into the diegesis of, has easy access to pornographic material, and South Park completely shrugs at that. Although this is for an entirely different reason, it's commentary on easy access. But I just wanted to point out the hypocrisy in South Park waving away the easy access problem to hyper focus on the fact that girls easy access sex bad now. Like, don't get me wrong, South Park isn't saying that the Kenny porn access problem is a good thing. It's just like hand waved off. Like, haha, oh Kenny, you scamp, you looking at easy access of material, you little horn dog. Also, Kenny is a man, and therefore, oh, I shouldn't really say that. Kenny is a boy, boy sex crazy, haha, nudge, nudge. And then you look at the girls in the show, and then South Park is all like, hello girls, did you know sex bad? I think sex is very, very bad. Sex bad. Don't do sex because it's bad. And if you do a sex, you are bad. Which is basically the problem with the episode. Like, the Kenny thing is another thing entirely. But the difference in how they handle, like, the topic of sex with boys and girls is certainly so radically different. That if you think about this episode for more than a few moments, it really makes you think that the South Park guys, Matt and Trey, were raised on a set of rather traditional ideals that gave them blind spots in their ideology. The show that hand waves Kenny off easy access is also the show that's telling little girls sex bad when the real message of the episode should be, hey, sit down about this for a second. Do you think that you can have the same lifestyle that Paris Hilton has? This is impossible because Paris Hilton comes from money. She comes from the Hilton dynasty. That woman is very, very rich. She is basically nearly ruling class. Like that's a very famous hotel chain, right? So this super rich white woman, her sex tape gets leaked, and a bunch of girls think that it will be okay to emulate it. And here's the thing. It's not bad to like sex, actually. Liking sex is actually a good thing. That's a part of your experience as a human being, and you should not be shamed for that. Which only makes the conclusion that South Park came to even more just very strange. I mean, it's just so radically different how they will casually hand wave off the easy access problem and then in the same breath go conservative hard on sex bad. But you need to understand that the reason they did it is because of the aforementioned disconnect of class when it comes to Paris Hilton versus the average Tina Smith. Like, you can't sell sex as a rich person because rich people are insulated from the consequences of sex because of their money and influence. In fact, you're seeing it right now in this administration. There was a government official who was able to get an abortion in a time where abortions are getting outlawed because of the privatization of the healthcare industry. There was that one politician who was able to get an abortion because she's white and a politician and she's in office, and meanwhile they're outlawing abortions for basically everyone, and then they kept a woman on life support, turning her into a womb, into a dead womb for a 1-inch baby, not a 1-inch protoplasm. And she was a black woman. This working class woman, got her body turned into a literal, like, incubator for a baby that wasn't even gonna make it. That family probably has hospital bills out the freaking wazoo. Like, it is insane, the disconnect of privilege that rich people have when it comes to sex. Like, those guys basically have it all. Meanwhile, your average Joe Smo will not only get hit with a bunch of social consequences, like being called a bunch of, like, derogatory names for a person who has a lot of sex. You could even risk losing your job because of the people that you sleep with, sexuality. And if you have a baby out of wedlock, and your dating life will be significantly harder. Men will look at you like, men or women, if you're a single father somehow, will look at you like you're a fucking weirdo for having sex out of marriage, because of the time period that this episode came out in. It was still a leaning more conservative. But basically, you have way more consequences if you're a poor person having sex than if you're a rich person having sex. And this episode should have capitalized on that instead of sex bad. Because when you sex bad, here's the thing about sex bad, right? That don't help nobody. When you tell people to abstain from having sex, you are only telling them that the concept of intercourse, a natural human thing, is something that should be avoided at all costs, when in reality, what you need to do is teach people safe ways to have sex. And as for your kids, 100% of every single child on this planet does not care about sex. What you need to understand is that children generally do not care. They need to be educated about their bodies, but the average child doesn't want anything to do with sex. Hell, I'm 30 years old and I barely want anything to do with it. Well, when you don't teach people about their bodies and you abstain from knowledge of, how hormones affect the bodies, that's how you get, like, serial killers who kill for sexual pleasure. That's literally how it starts. When you refuse to teach people about their bodies. People need to learn things about their bodies. They need to understand how their bodies work. Because if you don't, it just causes people pain and misery and suffering. People need to be educated on how their body works and how hormones work and how to talk to other people and how to communicate sexual desire and how to communicate sexual need and how to have an open, a relationship where communication is open. Here's the thing. I get what Matt and Trey are saying about Kenny Easy Access, but the thing about Kenny Easy Access is that it very much destroys what this episode is going for because of the extreme gender dichotomy of how sex and sexual topics are handled in South Park between men and women. For girls, you get sex bad, don't have sex. For men, you get, hey, easy access, booby, porn. And I get that this is supposed to be a comment on how men and women's sex treatment in society, like improper condom use, that's very much the message of the episode. But to see that rhetoric just very nonchalantly appear in the show uncritically itself is very hypocritical. I'm not trying to come down on Matt and Trey for talking about poor and easy access. That's not what I'm trying to do. The point of the matter is that some of these episodes really are just showing their age, because it really does just show the difference in beliefs and how social norms have progressed, to see them be so nonchalant about Kenny easy access, and to just see his sexualization, just the sexualization that Kenny does on women, to be just so uncritically like accepted rather than challenged for what it's supposed to be, which is a very depressed child using easy access pornographic material to try and escape mentally from a situation that really is destroying them from the inside out. And then Paris Hilton gets sucked into Mr. Slave's ass, and then the Frog King shows up, and then the Frog King tells Paris Hilton to do the Lemmy-Winks quest. And it's the greatest ending in the entire show ever. I love the Paris Hilton Lemmy-Winks ending so much. Thank you, Paris Hilton. Now, you might be wondering, with all of that said, why do I consider this a Butters episode and not a Wendy's episode? Well, the thing is, Butters, at one point in the episode, is accosted by Paris Hilton. She attempts to turn him into one of her pets, and he does not want that. He wants to do everything he can to live as a normal child in South Park, despite the fact that Paris Hilton is offering him a life of luxury and comfort, away from it all, to be her pet until the day that one of them dies. Butters here is stating in this episode that he would much rather have the toil of the common man than be a pampered brat, a pampered, brainless, sex-obsessed brat for the rest of his life. He wants the struggle of man. He wants to know his common man. The man and Butters are one, and Butters listens to the plea of the proletariat. He hears the tortured cry of the worker. He will look at you in the eye and say, I know your struggle, and I have your struggle, and I want to live that struggle, and I love you. Because that is Butters. It is Butters to love. It is Butters to err. And it is Butters to accept that he wants to walk the hard and browbeaten path in the name of empathy, love, and understanding. Also, the episode that focused on women body modifications that I mentioned before is Baby's Boobs Destroy Society. I don't know if I mentioned that, but I just wanted to mention it here for austerity's sake. Also, the reason I don't consider this a Wendy episode is because it's basically a rehash of all of her most famous character traits up to that point, kind of centered into one episode. And I also think that this episode is the episode where Wendy basically decides that the ideas that she has been chasing her entire life have been kind of bad. It's kind of the episode where she decides to refocus on things that matter, in a sense. Like, it's a good episode for Wendy, but it's nothing that we haven't really seen before, which is kind of a shame, because if it did go for that like whole class sex bad thing, it actually would have been a really great Wendy episode. It could have potentially been one of the best Wendy episodes in the entire show if she had actually had a conversation about how you can't sell sex to lower class people because of the social dichotomy between poor and rich people. But we don't really get that episode, so you know. Okay, no more Paris Hilton. We're talking about Professor Chaos now. Okay, so Professor Chaos is the most interesting facet of Butters' character, because Professor Chaos has the most long-lasting consequences out of any Butters related subject in the entire show. Um, in well, there are he brings back Professor Chaos for Good Times with Weapons, a very beloved episode of the show. Personally, I'm pretty indifferent to it. It's fun enough. He comes back for the Coon and Friends, and most importantly, Professor Chaos comes back as Vic Chaos in the post-COVID future. I might actually do like individual episodes for the specials, but Professor Chaos in post COVID is perhaps the most interesting iteration of Butters we've ever gotten. Because not only does it cement Professor Chaos as a identity born out of trauma, and it's so smartly integrated into the COVID special too, because Vic Chaos comes back after Kenny's death, and Kenny's death was initially the impetus for Butters becoming a main character, and also the impetus for Professor Chaos becoming a an identity in the show to begin with. That is a level of smart writing that I genuinely appreciate. But the Vic Chaos persona is now being used as an actual supervillain identity, where Butters is scamming people out of their money using multi-level market schemes and NFTs, and using his very good persuasive powers of being an extremely dubious businessman to create havoc throughout the town. And he's very much only doing this out of the trauma of losing Kenny. Like, that's the major theme of the post-COVID specials, the trauma of losing a loved one and how that affects someone and how that can send people down really dark roads and really dark paths. The trauma of loss, the trauma of grief. It's actually where the themes from Kenny's death in season 5 and the exploration of Kenny's death in season 6 are the most strongest, because this is where the consequences of all of that are realized in full. Losing someone and the inability to process grief has done incredibly terrible things to all of the boys, even Butters. Like, the love that they all experienced and shared with each other has led them now down this incredibly dark path, and led all of them to having incredibly unfulfilling lives, even Cartman. Like, Cartman isn't actually happy in his marriage, and that's something that we might talk about in the future, but he very much only married Yentl to get one up on Kyle. None of these boys are happy, and it's because of the trauma and pain and loss of losing the friend group and losing Kenny. And Butters, actually, I would argue that Cartman is the one who gets hit with it the hardest, because every single action since Kenny's death he has taken in order to spite the hell out of Kyle. Cartman is definitely taking it the hardest, but he's very good at not letting people know. Not to scale the trauma meter, because each of the boys are dealing with the trauma of losing Kenny in a very different way, and it's clear that they all feel that very deeply. It's just interesting to me that Cartman's method of going about his grief is to antagonize Kyle, all while putting up this front, which kind of tells me that he's been the one who's had the hardest time dealing with it. Like, the only character who can snap Butters out of his persona is Cartman, who is also under a persona. It's the mutual handshake. It's the mutual handshake of their relationship being realized in the show for perhaps the very first time. That mutual handshake in hell that I know all so well is being realized through the show, and oh my goodness. It is so gratifying to see the mutual handshake as someone who's been watching the show for a very long time, and to just see all the meta text, all the complicated psychological barriers that Cartman and Butters put up around each other, and to just see them all melt away in one moment of genuine recognition. Because see, the thing is, Butters isn't talking to Stan or Kyle in a real way because he doesn't like them. And the only character who can get Butters, who can snap Butters out of that trance is Cartman, because he fears Cartman. He genuinely fears Cartman. And he recognizes the handshake. Handshake game recognizes handshake game. That is the game of the handshake. When you wear the mask, when you know the mask, when your entire identity has been the mask, you will know when other people are wearing masks, and you will know that you are both mutually in hell together. And it's that mutual acknowledgement of being in hell that finally gets Butters to come to his senses. But it's so funny because Cartman isn't doing this to be a good person. He's doing it so he can go back in time to shoot child Kyle because he hates Kyle. That's a really funny joke. That is genuinely probably one of the funniest jokes in the show. There are other jokes that I find funny, but that is such a funny joke that he is that angry about the falling out. Also, I want to go ahead and just offhandedly mention Mantequilla, a season 15 episode of South Park that helped corroborate Butters' opinions on luxury, entitlement, and his willingness to learn and to love and to understand the common man. His demonstration of class conscientiousness and his emotional intelligence when it comes to matters of platonic love. He has so much love to give despite the fact that his parents are train wrecks. And oh my goodness, I haven't even talked about his parents. Both Linda and Steven are both brazenly terrible people. They're both conservative, but I actually think they're the most conservative characters of the parents in the cast. Like, Linda and Steven both want to project the image that their lives are perfect and that they have a perfect little family, when in reality, Linda is in a sexless marriage with a gay man who does not love her in the way that she wants to be loved, and Steven is living a lie because he chases conformity over everything else. Their family is actually a nightmare disaster, and nobody over there is happy. And the only reason Butters is there, or chooses to stay with his family, even though he knows he could probably do better somewhere else, is because of his commitment to love. Butters loves his parents, and that's how it is with any child who has an abusive parent. When you're a kid, you're just gonna love your parents no matter how terrible they are. Even children in like horrifically abusive circumstances who get physically beaten by their parents will still go like, I love you, mom and dad, because that's how children are wired to operate. They're gonna love their biological caretakers no matter the quality of life they are given by them until they are in a position where they can no longer do so, or where it is obvious that the parent is not having their best interests in mind, where it is most obvious, not where it's obvious. And that's how it is when you're a kid. You just love your mom and dad because they're your mom and dad. Some children, they get snapped out of that real quick. Sometimes they genuinely do. And for Butters, I believe he knows. And I believe he knows because he demonstrates via his actions that he is aware that his family is pretty messed up. But he will continue to move forward because he has so much love to give. And he does get love in return in very unexpected ways, even if Butters doesn't get the love that he feels that he should get. It usually does find some way to come back to him. Actually, a really good example of this is in Worldwide Privacy Tour, one of my favorite Kyle episodes in the show. Butters' parents take him to an image man, basically a super advanced con man that tells Butters basically that he has to care about his image. And Steven and Linda most likely did this because they don't want the trouble of having to navigate Butters through developing self-esteem or a personality. Plus, they don't really have self-esteem or a personality, so they want to pawn that off on someone else. They want to pawn off the responsibility of teaching Butters important life lessons on someone else because they don't want to do it. They think they're going to hurt Butters more than they already have. And Butters, with Kyle in that episode, learns that his image really isn't as important as he would like to pretend it is. In fact, Butters in this episode, along with Kyle, learns that caring about your image, trying to project an image of success and happiness when you're not actually successful and happy, is only more damaging to your mental health than it is to just be honest about where you are. And it's a very important lesson for someone like Butters, having been brought up in a very conservative family obsessed with image, for him to finally accept that he doesn't need to care about any of that because it's unimportant nonsense. And now we're going to circle into Walk is Dead. It's funny because there are so many more Butters episodes that I wanted to talk about that are pertinent to his personality, like Butters Bottom Bitch. That's actually a really important one. What else could I have talked about? I could have talked about, the one where they conned him into losing a bunch of weight. Also could have talked... I didn't even talk about going native. That's a really important Butters' episode. But the episodes that I picked were ones that were generally lined with the trajectory of his character. And we're going to end it out with Walk is Dead because I think Walk is Dead is basically a retread of another episode in the show, the season 23 Halloween special, the Tegrity Holiday special. It's basically a retread of that episode, but with a much more actualized conclusion and one that is more honest to the experience of Butters, I feel. And also for the record, it's kind of impossible to talk about the season 3 Halloween special without mentioning Trey's personal life, so we're not really gonna do that. In Walk is Dead, Butters is asked by Red to procure a very special Rabubu, an extremely rare collector's item, to bring to her birthday party. And she's specifically asking Butters because she knows that she can con him into doing it without putting up much of a fuss. If she were to ask any other boy, there would be a little bit of backlash, but Butters is passive and nice enough that if a girl approaches him out of the expectation that there might be more, he'll probably do it under the presumption of perceived intimacy. Well, it is important to note that Butters is a victim in this situation. He is a victim of circumstance. He is specifically being sought out because he is the only boy that Red has deemed will do this. He is being preyed on. And of course he goes to City Walk, and Mr. Luke Kim is turned his entire store into a gotcha hub, an advanced gambling casino that doesn't look like a gambling casino, but it actually is a gambling casino. He basically turns the City Walk into a gambling casino because of the way the economy is down spiraling into the toilet. Now, this is commentary on the tariffs, of course, but this is also a stealth autopsy of the Tegrity Farms arc. Because Randy, he initially wants to do a weed farm. He wants to buy a weed farm because of changes in the marketplace. that are affecting his family's lives in South Park. Shelley is being preyed on by predatory people at school. She was trying to get a vape, but she sent the kid a picture of a dog's butthole and not her butthole, and then that caused a problem. Basically, changing market environments has influenced Randy in the most how should I say, misguided way possible to go live out on the farm. He basically chooses isolationism as a solution to the problem of predatory salesmen trying to influence Shelley. And of course, it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because the thing about a marketplace, right, is that a marketplace can't really be taken down with one person. I had to learn this the hard way. There is no way that one person can feasibly take down an entire marketplace through campaigns, through calls to action, because in the marketplace you vote with your wallet, and that's kind of the point of the original Integrity episode, and that's the point of this episode. These predatory marketplaces are going to exist because people keep perpetuating the predatory conditions that necessitate the conditions for the marketplace existing. It's supply and demand. It's basic economics 101. If there is a demand for a product, then eventually there is going to be someone, malintentioned or not, who will provide the product. And quite frankly, when you facilitate a marketplace of unhealthy ideas and you facilitate a predatory marketplace, it creates situations where victims like Butters get preyed upon for not only their money, but for also promises like perceived intimacy. Like, Butters is being preyed upon in a way that a lot of men are actually preyed upon in capitalism. If you have a lot of money and you can get, women or people that you're attracted to, power, possessions, economic clout, if you can offer someone that and they're not necessarily having your best interest in mind, they will take advantage of you. And this is also a consequence of not teaching people about their bodies. Yes, we looped back into the Paris Hilton episode. And what this episode also does is let South Park basically make a better statement than the one they did before. South Park is now looking at you. They are looking at you dead in the eyes. They are sitting down with you at a little table and said, hey, we've had some actually rather bad ideas about sex, the woman's place in it before, and our own potential hypocrisy about the way we handle gender dichotomy. So we want to actually apologize and present commentary that actually hits the actual problem instead of blaming people for circumstances and situations out of their control. And the funniest part of it is that they did this all without issuing an apology to Paris Hilton. And quite frankly, I don't think they owe that woman an apology because there was no way for them to know what her life was like. All South Park could do was respond to the irresponsible behavior on display and try to put out the potential fires that irresponsible behavior like that could have solved. I don't have anything against Paris Hilton. I want to actually make it very clear that I do sympathize very heavily with what she was going through. In fact, Paris Hilton kind of is a part of the mutual handshake. No, scratch that. She is a part of the handshake. You were in hell with Cartman and Butters this entire time, and she is part of the handshake. She's part of the handshake. She's in hell with all of us. But much like Butters holding Cartman to his behavior, you're never going to be able to sell a lifestyle like that to the proletariat. And quite frankly, yeah, you can't sell lifestyles like that. Much like the marketplace is trying to push these lifestyles on children. Like, the marketplace is an extremely predatory place, and it's only getting even more predatory with all of these government entities and bodies being privatized. Like, the marketplace is becoming just as unsafe as it was in the early 20th century, and people are just kind of letting it happen. Well, actually, I should say conservatives are just letting it happen, but the marketplace is allowed to become just as safe as it was in the 1920s out of some perceived like notion of the Americana needing to return to it being great when it never was great. This country has always been dog water. This dog water terrible country. And Butters would call it a dog water terrible country. Butters would call America a dog water terrible country. The video is over now.